welcome to the first episode of the Faith Journey. I am very excited that you are tuned in. If you are listening to the podcast or if you're watching, either way, welcome here. If you are watching, I might be looking down at my laptop just because I have a couple of notes, because otherwise this would be probably a 3 hour long podcast. So yeah, I hope you don't mind that. I am a little bit just nervous, to be honest. So yeah, let's just see how this goes. And I hope it just will encourage you, even if it's just one person. Maybe it's you listening. I just really hope that my story can just be encouraging. So there's a couple of things that I would really like to just share before I jump into my story. And one of those things is that, whether you are walking through a challenging time, or maybe you're exploring faith or faiths, and maybe you're curious about the person of Jesus, maybe you're not quite sure where you are so welcome here, regardless of, where you are at the moment. And this will really stand true for every single conversation, every single episode. So the heart behind every episode is one of love and one of respect. I really, really, really stand firmly on this. And so each conversation and, everything that I will be sharing, it's an invitation. It'll always be an invitation. And one of my invitations and one of the things I encourage you to do is to just have an open mind and an open heart, and to really just let yourself receive, the love of God. And if words like God or Jesus or any sort of passage from the Bible, or even the word Bible, like any Christian lingo, like the word testimony, if any of that scares you maybe, or brings up any sort of attachments that maybe you've had because of what society or your friends or your family, any sort of experience that you might have had with any other churches, whatever that might be, I see that, but I really ask you to just please stay and listen to this. Just do this really courageous thing, if you are up for it, and just open yourself up, because there's so much goodness that's coming your way, not because of this podcast, but because of the infinite and kind and beautiful love that God offers us. And the truth of who God is, the truth of who Jesus is that He is love. And love is what is on offer for you and for me. And so with that, I also just kind of want to say that I am very much still at the beginning of my journey. I'm very much still in a challenging period as well. So I'm walking with you through this. I just want to record, and document what God is doing. Yeah, we are walking together in authenticity and in vulnerability, which is so challenging. But my prayer and my hope is that this encourages someone. And this is why I want to share, the witnessing of my own journey, finding faith, to starting to cultivate a relationship with Jesus, and to finding sort of this golden truth, that is now sort of radically changing my heart and changing my life, day by day. So yeah, this is my testimony video. So essentially, testimonies just means, the stories of how God is moving in our lives. That's how I want to kind of open this podcast, with this episode. And as I said, my prayer is just that it can encourage even just one person in keeping an open heart and in walking closer to God. So when I was thinking about like, where am I going to start with this? I think a good place to start is with just gratefulness for having a really loving family and parents, that always wanted the best for me. I had a roof over my head, and I have a roof over my head. I was able to go to school and get an education, and I have some good friends in my life. And so I'm standing, from a place of privilege, and I know that that's not the case for many, many people. And I really want to acknowledge that and all of the goodness that really is and has been in my life. But I also know that doesn't shelter us from suffering. It definitely didn't shelter me from pain. And yeah, pain didn't just pass me by. So at this stage, I also do want to put a bit of a trigger warning, perhaps, of, I will get into talking about mental and physical health struggles that are part of my story. I think there's some encouragement there for you. But if you feel like, this is not for you at this moment, then just, I hope you're able to discern that for yourself. I was also thinking, like, where after this, what's the next thing that was part of maybe my journey. And it's quite interesting how didn't really have like a spiritual background or anything like that, as in I grew up in just a secular sort of environment. I didn't grow up in a family that had any faith. My parents didn't, my grandparents didn't. I didn't have really friends, that were Christians or had any faith in their lives, really. I think the last time I properly went to a church was when I was maybe 9 years old, and at the time I was still back in Italy, and yeah, that was pretty much it, actually. So I didn't really have any exposure to anyone with faith growing up, aside from one friend who I met in university. She's religious, she's not Christian, but yeah, aside from her, I didn't really see people, talking about or hear people talking about God or, yeah, by any means, Jesus. However, with that, I was quite a nerdy child kind of growing up. I was always thinking a lot, and that definitely stayed with me. I was reading quite a lot as well. I was really curious always about everything, and I feel like I was kind of doing deep dives of whatever took my interest at that point, whether it was like women's rights or politics, or at some point religion as well. And as I said, even though I had no faith in my life, I went on being so interested in it. And in university, I, wrote so many papers on the role of religion in shaping identity or influencing civil conflicts and so on. So it was almost like it was a really deep interest, but from a very topical perspective, from a very academic perspective, and from the outside. And I looked at people who had faith in their lives, and they kind of intrigued me, but I was so distant from it that I never really made, anything of it in terms of my personal life. So this was kind of my spiritual background, my spiritual life, I guess, or lack thereof, actually, up until about, I would say, a year and a half ago. Another thing to say, I think, is I tend to be quite a stubborn person, and someone who felt very driven from a young age. And for some years, I was really, like plotting along really nicely, and I kind of, knew what I wanted to do with my life. And so I just went at it. Just take a sip of water. And then I left my parents' home and, the country that I had been living in for the past 4 years with them. And I went to university. And I really wanted that. I was craving that independence, and I really couldn't wait for kind of, yeah, for more independence and to start living alone and to start really creating, my own life. I always took and I sometimes really still do take a lot of pride in my independence and in having this I can all do it by myself and alone type of mentality. At the end of my high school years, I got quite sick for a period of time, like physically sick, and I lost quite a lot of weight. And that all of a sudden kind of brought a lot of praise from other people, and I became very conscious about my appearance. And it shifted from being something that I was conscious of myself, and I just thought it was something that I was noticing, which I'd always been, even as a child. I was always very aware of my physical appearance and of my body. But then it switched to, oh, so people notice as well. When I then went to university, I was living in a student accommodation, and I obviously, was in a different country, 18-year-old, different country from my parents, new country, didn't speak the language, and there was a pressure, to look a certain way, and that's definitely at least what I felt, and it slowly but surely just brought me really deep into an eating disorder. The fact that I was living alone and I didn't have anyone that was quote unquote like seeing what I was doing really when I was alone meant that I would essentially just starve myself for days on end, and I would really try and make myself sick over exercising, to the point of feeling faint on my runs or whatever that was that day. And so I just really started to engage in really dangerous and really harmful behaviors without many people knowing about it or even noticing it. And that was great for me because it was just something that I was only aware of and that I was in control of, or at least I thought I was. I sort of eventually then realized that I really needed help, and so I checked myself into like a recovery therapy program that I found, and throughout the next year or so, it basically helped me to recover the basic skills, or not even basic skills, like the basic needs, I should say, that my body really needed, like, eating regularly, for instance. And in all of this, I had absolutely no conception of God. I didn't think there was a God. I wasn't even thinking about it, or asking myself the question. So anyway, long story short, I went through this period that, was really challenging, but then I kind of ended up outside of it and I felt a bit more stable. At that point, COVID was over too, and I decided to then move to the UK. I got into a master's program, so I was really excited, felt like a really, really good, fresh start. So I felt really in control, which will be a theme here, just really ready to go again. However, I was still so deeply at the root of it, insecure, and just looking for people's validation of my body, of my appearance, of my intelligence at that point, of what I had accomplished, of my grades, of my potential. So then fast forward to 2023, finished my master's, started proper, my first proper sort of corporate full-time job, and I was so proud, felt really great. Again, another great fresh start that I felt in control of. And yet, so much was still going on just underneath it, so much clinging to this idealized life that I had created, this pressure just building that brought me back just into a period of darkness, this time only deeper, especially since this wasn't the 18-year-old, Camilla, or 19-year-old Camilla, but a much more mature version of myself that was a lot more aware as well of the fact that I was really, really, really struggling. And I tried fixing things alone. So essentially, at that point, fixing myself wasn't working. And fixing myself alone wasn't working. The therapy I got those years back was really helpful. And as I said, it kind of restored, my basic functions that I really needed to keep existing. But the root of the problem, my sense of unworthiness of all things that I had in my life, it only grew stronger, and it really just started to just sink just deeper and deeper and deeper down. I started to go back to some of those old behaviors and those old sort of negative thinking patterns. So that was a really, really challenging period, and I wasn't able to be open about this with other people, because again I thought I was really in control. And at that point my body as well started to experience really long periods of chronic health issues like pain and so on, which really only made things worse. So it felt like my whole being, my mind, my body, everything was in pain. And that was it was breaking me. It was so challenging. And this one evening in October of 2023, I think that was one of the hardest days of my life. I was in my room. I was alone, feeling like, yeah, there was just no hope for me. I mean, I was deep into mental health problems, eating disorders, exercise, obsessions and addictions, obsessive thoughts, being, physical pain and chronic conditions just coming up and feeling like I couldn't live my day-to-day life. And I just remember being in that room, and I wanted to live, I wanted to build a life, to build a family of my own, to develop in my career. I still had this sense of ambition. I did want to live, but I also had this realization that I couldn't live like this. I mean, I didn't want to live that way. So I just couldn't do it anymore. I mean, getting dressed every day was a challenge. Walking and being in the office for long hours was really challenging. Eating was difficult. And, sometimes still is. And I sometimes still really struggle with these things. And I said that at the beginning as well. I'm not on the other side of this completely, but there's a sense of hope that now I'm walking with. And anyway, so in this evening, I felt like the simple act of being alive, of living, was just so tiring. And so I was in this space of I wanted to live, but I didn't have the energy to live a life in the hands of my sickness. So I felt stuck in the middle, really questioning my life, really questioning how I was going to get out of it, because I didn't see a way out of it, to be honest. And I didn't know how I could remain alive in this way. And so it brought a lot of really scary thoughts and questions, and yeah, just it makes me emotional, because I just have so much compassion for anyone that feels stuck in this place. And I have compassion for myself on that evening as well. And so I remember just being in my room, and at that point I just let go. I was alone, I was desperate, I felt just so defeated. I can't remember anything else really. I can't remember if there was music. I don't think there was. I can't remember if I had what was around me. I just remember being sat on my floor and just letting go, and just being like, I don't know. I don't know how I'm gonna live. And all of a sudden, what I started to feel was a sense of warmth that just turned into this overflowing, this overpowering, all encompassing warmth and sense of love that I just never ever had experienced with that intensity in my whole life. And it was touching me deep. It was touching my heart, and it was touching my soul. Something, a concept that I had never thought of, I had no conception of up until that point. And I completely forgot that I was in my body at that point after being so hyper aware of it my whole life. And so that was the love of a God that heard my weeping, that heard my crying, the love of a God that hears here's when we cry and when we're suffering. There's a psalm, that's Psalm 34 verse 18, and it says that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. And the love that he extended to me in that moment, the way he touched me in that moment, without having said a single prayer, without even looking for God, without even having ever had, the thought or the idea of there being a God that can so generously come and rescue us and come and give us that love and take that pain away from us, is just an example of how faithful he is and how true this psalm is. That was an experience that led me down a whole different path in my life. And now you can imagine me coming out of that moment really gradually, and as I said before, not really being brought up around the conception of a God, not being around a conversation of, who God is, if there's a God or anything along those lines. It just felt like something I never could have experienced myself. And one thing that I also want to say is that I was at some point just really aware of the fact that that love that I felt, I wasn't giving it myself, like it wasn't coming from me internally, because there was not a single drop, there was not a single ounce of love left in my body towards myself in particular. And I was really aware of that, really, really, really aware of that. And so you can imagine you get touched by something like that, and then what? I started having all these questions, like, how do I feel that again? What was that? Like, what did I just touch, or what just touched me? And where do I kind of go from here? What do I need to do? Mind you, I also didn't know that was Jesus at that point, and I didn't know that all I had to do was actually do nothing and just be, and that it was just to open my heart and open, myself to him, like I had done in that moment in my room. But I knew that this love that I had experienced, it was not the fabrication, right, of my own mind or my own being, as I said. So that led me on this whole journey for the next year and a half. So all throughout last year, all throughout 2024, of exploring God and what God means. And I didn't start from the idea of a Christian God, or, I didn't start from Jesus, but I was exploring the conception of God, and I was exploring God still in the midst of deep suffering. This encounter that I had, it didn't heal me instantly. And I want to be really transparent and clear about that as well. I was suffering so much all throughout last year, and I still am, to some extent, still, in it. And I also must say that all of this suffering was still, and just this pain that I still had in my life was still very coveted. It was still completely, you know, sheltered from other people. All of this journey throughout last year was a very, very intimate, and it was a very, very personal journey and experience, which is why it's quite scary for me to talk about this, let alone share it with people, and just put it out there. And even the word God at that point was kind of scary. So at first it was, the universe, and then it was a loving space, and compassion. And eventually I sort of came around to the word God, but as I said, not in the sense of a Christian God or Jesus, but in the sense of God as in a higher being. I started to naturally spend a lot more time in solitude. I was reading a lot. I was listening to people of all different faiths. I was exploring all different faiths. I went to Hindu temples and kirtans, and I was reading, some of their sacred texts, and studying those. And I then, started going to and exploring my local mosque. Someone gave me a copy of the Quran and started reading the Quran. I went to Buddhist centers and I found fascinating faiths and fascinating worlds that were kind, and these were kind and welcoming and supportive communities, but I just couldn't connect to God. I just couldn't. I couldn't connect to God quite as much. And whilst I talk about all of this, again, I want to share my deepest appreciation and my deepest respect for others, as I said, because I met some people that were just so welcoming, but I just knew that those weren't my spaces. That wasn't God, for me. And so I was going through all these experiences, but then in summer of 2024, I just went back in a bit of a negative cycle, back in it again. And I had these fleeting kind of moments of stability, that would then end up in periods of deep darkness right where I started, except this time I was going deeper and deeper. But there was one thing that for me felt really visceral, and that was I had this sense of reverence, and I had this sense of deep, respect and worship towards a God. And through all of this exploration, through all of this year, that became a hunger that I never felt before, and that it didn't feel like it was getting satisfied in any of these, different paths that I was exploring. That is just what I was following, and that is how God was speaking to me, even though I wasn't aware of it, back then. And yeah, I wasn't aware of it back then, but it makes sense, because we were created to worship God, and we were created to be in relationship with God. And that is the original story, of humanity before just so much darkness and distractions, of the modern sort of world that we're living in, before all of these entered the world and started to really disconnect us from God, throughout the centuries. And so in that summer, I just very, very gradually, very subtly started to feel more drawn towards Christianity. There wasn't a definite sort of day or a definite week or moment that I was like, okay, now I'm going to explore Jesus. It wasn't like that really for me, but I felt guided by this sense of worship and this sense of finding God. And it was a really gradual journey for me, and a gradual process. And really slowly, worship songs kind of started to get, recommended to me on Spotify. And same thing with podcasts, just really randomly, just because of algorithms. And I started sort of listening to people's stories, which was something so powerful for me, and which is also why I want to share my own, because I knew just how important it had been and how important it still is to me right now. And so, yeah, listening to podcasts and people's stories and testimonies and so on. And slowly, I started to feel my heart kind of defrosting, and my curiosity and this sense of worship, this hunger that I felt and that I still feel. It just kept growing stronger and stronger until one day I just kind of got the courage to bring myself alone to a church service. And the first couple of times that I went, I was really I had many misconceptions. I was really kind of worried as well, and I began going the first couple of times to a mega church here in London, and that was because it was the only church that I knew of, first of all, but also because I really wanted to be a face in the crowd. And I was scared, I didn't want to feel like an imposter sort of being there, because I wasn't Christian, I was just kind of exploring, and I didn't want anyone really to come and speak to me. No one really did. But I think after I went one or two times, I just soon realized that I wanted to explore a few other churches, and I ended up one Sunday at a service of a church that is now the church I call my home church, and stepping in there and spending the service just being filled with the tangible presence of God. I spent the whole service that Sunday crying in those seats, just looking around me at just so many people that looked so different in all many different ways, but they were all worshiping. They were all worshiping and, playing these songs and worshiping a loving God and laying hands on each other in prayer. I'd never seen that ever. And I was just so amazed, and I just felt like, wow, I think I'm onto something. And the first worship song that actually they played was Goodness of God. And that was the first worship song that I had added to a Spotify playlist. I didn't think that, I didn't really know it was a worship song. I didn't really know what worship songs were at that point, but I did add it to my playlist. And so when they started also playing that song, I mean, I left that service just filled with the awareness of what it feels like to have the Spirit, to feel the Holy Spirit, feeling closer for the first time to Jesus and to the person of Jesus, feeling my heart so on fire, so curious for Jesus in particular. And I was asking then at that point some really, really deep questions, because I definitely had maybe a few misconceptions, about Christianity, even though I didn't really know anything about Jesus at that point. And so, yeah, I started exploring, the core of the Christian faith. And a couple of weeks after, I then reached out to someone on this church's staff team, and they sort of lovingly offered, their time and a listening ear. And it was, with her, after these weeks of really intense questioning and studying and listening to God, that I just gave my heart to Jesus. And I just finally came to the understanding that it was Him all along. It was Him all along, and I didn't even know, and I didn't know that He was talking to me. And that's why He's just so good, and it gives me chills every time that I think about this. And yeah, as I've mentioned at the beginning, my healing journey, my faith journey, it's just begun. And that was at the end of last year that I felt like I'm home. This is what I was longing for, and it's something that you feel deep in your heart. And what I want to say is that, as I said, my journey, both with my faith and with my healing, it's really just begun, and days are really challenging still. Physically, really challenging. Mentally, really challenging as well. So I'm in the thick of it, and I feel you. If you're there with me, I feel you. But something is different. In fact, everything is different simply because I've got God in my life and I've got Jesus. And, there's, I'm not gonna sit here and just say, oh, I gave my life to Jesus and I came to faith and everything is just great now. No, it wasn't. It's not like that. I do believe that can happen for people, but it's just not my story, at least in this case. And it doesn't mean that it can't be your story, but it just isn't mine. But I just know that God is so good, that Jesus is so good. And this is what faith is. This is what being in those hard days and still just knowing that there's a loving God that is here in the struggle, that is here in it with me, who isn't distant, who isn't distant and asking me to do this and do that in order to access His love. No. His love is something that's giving to us. He gave it to me. He touched me in that moment in October of 2023, in a moment where I felt like I didn't know what to do. He knew it. He knew what to do. He came and He rescued me. I also just realized, I don't know how I never realized this before, but I had a first encounter with God in October of 2023, not knowing it was Jesus, and I gave my life to Jesus, and I came to faith in October of 2024. Wow. I don't know how that, I don't know how I actually never thought about that. But how, I mean, if that's not from God, then I don't know. Yeah, all of this is to say that I know that there is a God that comes and saves us when we feel so desperate and when we feel so lonely. We have a God who gives us hope. We have a God who gives us hope and grace, not because of anything that we have done or anything that we do, anything that I did, like I said, but simply because of His kindness and of His loving nature. We have a God who takes our darkness, who takes our pain, the depths of our pain, the darkest moments, that come with being in this world, and he saves us from it. Jesus offers me and you and all of us a different story. His cross gives us the freedom to live in a different story. And I'm just still coming to grips with his goodness, with what he's been doing in my life. And it's been really intense. It's been really, really, really intense. And I still have questions, of course. And I'm still learning. Oh my goodness, I don't think we ever stop learning, to be honest. And he's just so good. I mean, I'm not sorry. He's so good. And I am just going to say that over and over. And maybe listening to this, and I mentioned the cross, which is something that it took me a while to actually understand what it means. And maybe I will do an episode on that and talk more about that in more depth. But maybe you don't quite understand what all of this means. And that's okay. That is so okay. There were so many things that I was still wondering and questioning, and I thought that I needed to read the whole Bible before I could come to faith, and that is not true, you know. That is not true, and it's okay if you still have questions, because I do as well. And if there's just one thing that I would love for you to take away from all of this, from my story, is that my story is not any more special than yours or anyone else's. If God worked through my life, he will do so in yours as well, and he probably is. If he came and rescued me, if he came and touched me when I was so sheltered my whole life from Christianity, from faith, from religion, from accessing any sort of conversation around God or having any knowledge of the existence of God, if he came and did that to me, he can surely do that to you, whatever your life is, whatever your circumstance is. His love is for all of us. His love is for you. His love is for me. And this incredibly good news that we have, that there is a loving God that is so compassionate, that comes and is with us, who is there to just welcome us, who is willing to heal us, who is willing to restore us. This is good news not just for me, but it's good news for you and just for all of us. And it can be good news, and it is good news, and it can be your story as well, if you just open your heart to God, if you just open your heart and open your mind to God and to Jesus. He will not force it. He is a gentle, gentle God. You know, in all of this, he knew that I needed to do my own exploration. He knew that I needed to ask those questions, you know, to do my reading, my exploring, asking questions to people and doing all of this exploration. He didn't force anything. And that's because he was waiting for me to come to him. And I just love that about him. I just love that so much. And that's because God knows our hearts. He knew my heart. He knows yours. He knows all of ours. He knows our personalities, our ways of beings, the ways we need to understand things. And he uses that. And I just find that so, so beautiful and so encouraging. There's no blanket approach that he uses. There's not only one story that, he can use. No, only if you do this, then I can, he can come and be in your life. That is not it. You just need to be open to his love. And so I would love to end with a verse from Psalm 139, which ties all of this, I think, really well. Then it's one of the first verses that, really stuck out to me. Yeah, it's Psalm 139. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You're familiar with all my ways. Yeah, that was Psalm 139 from verse 1 to verse 3. The psalm continues. It's a beautiful psalm that I've been, just kind of meditating on and studying. I think I will probably leave it at that for now. I just hope that this encourages you. I'm so curious if there's anything that has come up for you as I was talking about this, or anything that you resonated with. To close up, just know that whatever you're going through, we're doing this together. We're walking through challenges in this world together. And just know, if there's, again, one thing, is that, whatever your situation is, whatever your hardship is right now, God is right there with you, and He is waiting for you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this made sense. I hope what I said was clear enough. I don't even know how long this is. I'm really, really grateful for you listening. And I'm sending you loads of warmth and loads of love. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.